Hey everybody, before we get into today's episode, I would like to talk to you about Honest History. Honest History is a history magazine for young historians. Each issue has full-color, beautifully illustrated pages that are packed with amazing tales from our past. I am a public school employee and my wife homeschools our boys, and we both agree that Honest History is a great supplement for any student who has a passion for the past. For example, Issue 12, Special Delivery, features great articles about stamp collecting, the history of airmail, an interview with a postal worker, and every print copy you buy comes with instant access to an interactive digital copy. Follow the link in my show notes or go to honesthistorymag.com today to get the gift of a solid history education for your little historian. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, isn't it? Last week we unraveled the thrilling tale of the Hounds of Hell's Hollow, but by the conclusion of the story we realized that things were not exactly as they seemed. If you haven't listened to that episode already, I encourage you to do so before proceeding with this episode, because we're going to untangle a tale that is as disturbing as it is complex, and in some ways, it's even scarier than the Hounds of Hell's Hollow. My name is Josh, and this is Obscure History. The best thing about studying history is that if you're doing your research properly, it feels a bit like being a detective. I found that it's a feeling I particularly enjoy. I remember when I was writing my undergraduate thesis on Jamestown, I had run into this wall in my research. I needed more information, but I just couldn't seem to find it. I went back over my notes, and I reread the books that I was using, but I still couldn't find the right way to push my paper forward. My professor reminded me to really dig into the footnotes that were featured in the sources I was using, and by carefully inspecting those footnotes, I was able to track down some of the best sources, and it was like this key that unlocked my whole paper. After discovering those sources, everything just opened up before me, and I felt like I solved this long, cold crime. It's great when history is like following a trail of breadcrumbs, and honestly, it's a sign that we're doing something right. It's not very deep historical research if all we do is reword the Wikipedia article about whatever we're studying. To form an accurate and interesting historical narrative, we have to get our feet dirty in the rigorous job of research, boring as it may be at times. While doing the dirty work of research, I discovered, much to my delight, that the Hounds of Hell's Hollow story was an unlikely breadcrumb. I ended last episode by asking a question. Why would a pair of Chicago newspaper authors go so far out of their way to craft an outrageous story like that? The answer is truly remarkable and complex, and it all starts with one man, William Randolph Hearst. Hearst was born in San Francisco in 1863. His upbringing was highly unique in that his father was George Hearst, a millionaire who had amassed a fortune in the mining industry. The elder Hearst used his fortune and renown to expand his business ventures into publishing and politics, even becoming a senator in 1886. If we trace his family tree even farther back, we see that his grandfather, John Hearst, was one of the first colonists in the New World, and that he was a renowned Protestant minister. Though he came from a lineage of American aristocracy, the apple unfortunately rolled a great distance away from the tree. William Randolph Hearst started his educational career at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, and eventually attended Harvard University. As is the case with many young adults, Hearst fell off the rails a bit at college. He joined a fraternity, began performing in the theater, hosted massive beer parties on college grounds, and even sent small used chamber pots to professors with their images inside the bowl. Eventually his antics got him expelled from Harvard. Dejected, he set off to find a new path for his life. Luckily, he had a very substantial safety net. His very wealthy father gifted him a newspaper in San Francisco, the San Francisco Examiner. Hearst rolled into the Bay Area riding high on a wave of his father's money and his own massive ego. In a move that might seem familiar, Hearst steamrolled the competition by buying all of the highest quality equipment, spending the most on advertising, slandering his competitors, and by hiring the most well-renowned authors of the day. At the same time, Hearst had Ambrose Bierce, Mark Twain, and Jack London writing for the Examiner. He crowned his paper the monarch of the dailies, and he wasn't really wrong. The Examiner went from being a second-rate paper to dominating the San Francisco media market in just a couple of short years. Hearst was bolstered by this success and began to shape his vision. Much like modern news organizations, Hearst dreamt of having his presence in every major market. After fully dedicating himself to this vision, he said that he always knew that his dream of a nation-spanning, multi-paper news operation was impossible without a triumph in New York. And with that, he shipped off to the Big Apple. Combining the wealth he had accumulated from the Examiner and money from his then-widowed mother, Hearst purchased the New York Morning Journal. Much like his efforts to build the San Francisco Examiner, his first move was to poach talent from his rivals and outfit the Morning Journal with the best and most expensive equipment available. However, this time was slightly different than his time at the Examiner, because he entered into a direct circulation war with Joseph Pulitzer and his legendary paper, The New York World. You might be wondering what makes it a circulation war. I mean, it's only natural that a media company would want to compete against other media companies. That's not entirely surprising. But when Hearst lured the entire New York World Sunday staff away from the paper with above-market value salaries, Pulitzer took it personally, and the competition between the two media companies heated up beyond what might be naturally expected. Hearst's tactics here were very interesting. He offered the Morning Journal at the cool price of 1 penny, which made it cheaper than his rivals. He then offered above-market value salaries to just about everyone that he employed. He also poached talent from across the nation, bringing his favorite managers from the San Francisco Examiner and a very well-known columnist from the Portland Oregonian over to assist in the launch of the Morning Journal. Hearst quickly built a reputation as one of the premium employers in all of New York City, and it's said that he was generous, paid more than his competitors, gave credit to his writers with one-page bylines, and was unfailingly polite, unassuming, and impeccably calm. He was indulgent of prima donnas, eccentrics, bohemians, drunks, and reprobates so long as they had useful talents. I actually find it very interesting that he had such a good reputation personally. For being such an aggressive businessman, it's sort of shocking, isn't it? He literally stole his competitor's entire Sunday staff, but by all accounts he was this affable guy behind closed doors. The competition between Hearst and Pulitzer actually became so severe that it caused a workers' strike. In a recent article for PBS, Kirsten Butler writes, "The Journal, a newspaper he'd purchased to gain entry into the New York City market, was in its third year of fierce competition with The World, the daily newspaper owned by Joseph Pulitzer. Both Hearst's Journal and Pulitzer's World had their headquarters on Newspaper Row, a block of downtown Manhattan so named for its concentration of newspaper offices, and proximity seemed only to stoke Hearst and Pulitzer's rivalry. The Journal and the World battled incessantly for exclusives, competed for the largest circulation numbers, poached each other's staff, and spied on each other's operations. Throughout 1898, the two men competed to dominate coverage of the Spanish-American War. For all of their ruthless competition with each other, one thing they agreed on was raising their newspapers' wholesale prices. The extravagant expense of wartime coverage caused the Journal and the World immense financial strain. The impact for the price hike immediately trickled down to their newsies. Both newspapers relied on legions of young resellers, typically between the ages of 11 and 15, to get their publications into the hands of customers. Initially, young distributors had no complaints about the price increase, which raised the cost of newspapers to them from 50 to 60 cents per 100 papers. Public interest in the war fueled purchases, and the newsies were assured a profit. But when the war officially concluded in August 1898, neither Pulitzer or Hearst conceded the 10-cent increase. A full year later, overall circulation was down from wartime highs, and the newsies found themselves eating the cost of the unsold editions. Come summer 1899, the boys decided they had had enough. It was the millionaires who conceded first. During the strike's second week, Hearst and Pulitzer offered their sellers a new arrangement. Journal and World prices would remain at 60 cents, but going forward, the newsies would be refunded the cost of unsold papers. On August 2nd, the young distributors returned to their posts on the streets, but with their union dissolved. Throughout it all, Hearst astutely made no public statements. He had built his readership as a champion of the working class, and coming out against the newsies would have been more damaging in the long run than the strike. Privately, though, Hearst hoped that his silence on the matter would cast Pulitzer as the prime villain. An army of young boys may temporarily have brought the country's two most powerful publishers to their knees, but that was a battle Hearst was willing to concede. That's really shocking when you think about it. This man was such an aggressive businessman that his competition with another newspaper pushed an entire union into a massive strike. I mean, it's not the worst thing that Hearst did. Despite his squeaky clean personal reputation among his employees and the working class public, he was actually not a great guy. And by not a great guy, I mean he was the driving force behind the Spanish-American War. He married the daughter of a brothel owner, then cheated on her with an actress and had a child out of wedlock with her, who he only referred to as his niece. He built a castle, then bought a castle, then put himself $10 million in debt by building a ridiculous art collection. Turns out, Hearst was pretty much a slimeball from his birth to his death. And he's actually very well known historically. He even attempted to run for president once. But there is one period in his life that does not get as much attention as it probably deserves. But before we get into that, we need to pause and hear from some sponsors. So for the next 90 seconds, you can sit tight, and when we get back, we are going to tie together William Randolph Hearst and the Hounds of Hell's Hollow. Just as he had done in the San Francisco and New York City markets, Hearst attacked the Chicago news market. He followed his game plan pretty much to a T. He purchased a failing paper called the Evening American, sold it for a penny, poached talent from his competition, and stocked his organization with the highest quality equipment. Just as it had in New York City, this started a severe circulation war among all of the English-language newspapers in the Chicago area. But this time there was one very big difference. Hearst hired a man named Max Annenberg to be the American's circulation manager, and things immediately spiraled out of control. You see, Max Annenberg was not a good guy. In fact, as one paper put it, the Chicago Tribune has for manager of its circulation a thug of the name of Max Annenberg. He is the fellow who trained men to assault newsboys and to organize riots. The fellow is utterly without character and devoid of all sense of decency. The idea of trying to protect him from the consequences of his evil acts is a disgrace to the paper and a travesty on the name of justice. It would be wise for us to read a section like that with some hesitancy. After all, that's one newspaper calling out the circulation manager of another newspaper. Maybe it's an exaggeration or slander. But, in fact, it was not an exaggeration or slander. Newsies pushing the American were armed with brass knuckles, blackjacks, and guns, and were instructed to ensure that people bought the paper. Daily battles broke out on the street, and newsies from competing papers had to arm themselves in defense of the Hearst boys. Violence propelled violence, and the streets became a deadly place to be. John McGuire is the man said to have been in the bunch which nearly killed Officer Conlon when he interfered in one of their private circulation fights. He was sent to the Bridewell under a $200 fine, the limit. Lieutenant Martin of the Traffic Division, Officer Conlon's superior, says he thinks McGuire was one of the newspaper circulation gang. Conlon, still unable to leave his bed, will visit the Bridewell and attempt identification in a few days. McGuire has been described to me as one of the Herald Examiner bunch that slugged my man, declared Lieutenant Martin. When Conlon is able to leave the house, he will go over and look at the man. Being caught with a gun in his pocket and having a reputation as a bad man, McGuire would just fit as a member of a circulation gang. I understand that there was an out-of-town movement and a dozen circulation men left just after the trouble on the Clark Street Bridge. They know the time is gone when they can do their fighting within a stone's throw of the loop. And when they beat up a copper, some of them did not feel their connections to the newspapers would make them entirely immune, so they beat it. I hope that we have one of this slugger gang. I want to show these sluggers that they must quit or get. Their soft days are over. Early Friday morning, December 9th, Officer Conlon stopped a fight between two circulation gangs. He says they were from the Herald and Examiner. As he left the Clark Street Bridge where the scrap started, one of them hit him in the back of the head. Then both sides joined in and he was kicked and beaten unconscious. Another policeman, hearing the noise, rescued him and he was removed to a hospital for treatment. The circulation gangs were so intense that they nearly beat a police officer to death for trying to break up a fight. But it wasn't just the hired guns who ended up with blood on their hands. Circulation manager Max Annenberg found himself in a lengthy legal battle after an incident at an illegal gambling den. July 30th, 1913. The truth is that, without provocation, Max Annenberg, the circulation manager of the Tribune, shot down a young man in the streets of Chicago after a Tribune photographer attempted to take a flashlight photograph of a pool room on the west side. That photographer was accompanied by reporters and by sluggers under Max Annenberg, the circulation manager. Annenberg was in the Tribune party that night not as a photographer or reporter. He was there evidently to protect with his might and his gun the photographer and reporters. I have no fault to find with his protecting other Tribune employees from assault, but Alexander Belfort, the young man Annenberg shot, was not in the pool room at the time of the Tribune raid. He was not in any crowd that menaced the Tribune raiders, if any crowd did menace them. He was standing on the sidewalk with a friend. He made no demonstration against the Tribune party and gave no provocation whatever to Annenberg or anybody else. I know of no reason why an employee of the Tribune should have any more right to shoot down people in the streets of Chicago than any other bully or gunman has. For many years, Chicago has been cursed by a newspaper war of which the public got few details, because of the general policy of news suppression by the newspapers and publishers' associations. The fact that several of the newspapers, especially the Tribune and the Hearst papers, have employed sluggers is notorious. For years, these newspapers have practically been permitted to have a private police force, and the sluggers have not been molested by the police. During the newspaper lockout and strike last year, ex-convicts in the employ of newspapers killed 2 citizens on the streets of Chicago, to say nothing of newsboys and the Union workmen who were beaten up and locked up in prison without booking by police under the command of Captain Lavin, who has his headquarters in the Hearst newspaper building. At one time, Max Annenberg was the circulation manager of the Examiner. The Chicago circulation wars were a part of everyday life in Chicago throughout the 1910s and into the 1930s. In addition to the wild brawls that occurred in the streets, the Chicago papers pumped out sensational and fictitious stories as often as possible, to both distract from the growing problem of newspaper-inspired street violence and to entice new readers to buy a copy of their paper. Hence, the Hounds of Hell's Hollow. If you've got a particularly good memory, you'll remember that the article I read last week that debunked the Hounds of Hell's Hollow story made a point to inform their readers that the bogus story came from a Hearst paper. And they named the reporters by name multiple times. You see, the Hounds of Hell's Hollow story wasn't the inciting incident in the Chicago circulation wars, but it was clearly a symptom of the battle. The wars got so violent and pervasive that the city's Commissioner of Public Works, Joe Patterson, thought that the circulation wars could be stopped by banning newsstands from the sidewalks. He resigned before acting on this plan, though. In fact, it seems that nobody was really going to do anything to stop the violence. It was only the outbreak of World War I that stopped the circulation wars. And that's simply because most of the men who were hired to beat the city into consuming their employers' papers got sent off to Europe to further their violent careers. But that's not really where our story ends. You see, the legacy of the Chicago circulation wars lived on even after the end of World War I. Some of the men hired as Hearst paper enforcers went on to be some of the most notorious and dangerous gangsters of the mob era. Notably, Mossy Enright and Dion O'Banion, who went on to form the North Side Gang, which was the only gang to rival Al Capone's Chicago outfit. It is reported that in only 2 years, from 1910 to 1912, at least 27 newsies and paper delivery boys were killed in the Chicago circulation wars. In 1938, politician Harold Ickes gave this statement to Senator Joseph Guffey. He said, "The rise of Chicago gangsterism and racketeering may be traced to the bitter struggle for circulation between certain Chicago newspapers shortly before the World War. What I'm about to tell you is chiefly a matter of course record, the pleadings of Moe Annenberg's own lawyers." Annenberg assembled a gang of plug uglies, including Dion O'Banion, later a Chicago gang leader himself. Annenberg hired out the gang to Hearst to sell Chicago newspapers. The salesmanship consisted of sweeping competitor papers off the newsstands and pulling drivers from the seats of circulation trucks. Newsboys were beaten up for refusing to take more papers than they could sell. A trolley car was shot up by these newspaper salesmen. During this prelude to Capone, several men were killed. The reign of physical terror instituted by these advocates of freedom of press did not end until Chicago was ridden and ruled by racketeers. The hiring of Moe Annenberg by Hearst was the beginning of the subsequent flood of lawlessness that almost engulfed law enforcement in the United States. Bertie McCormick's Chicago Tribune soon got the idea. Bertie is a direct person. He did not bother finding a man who could match Annenberg. He got Annenberg himself. Moe's older brother was employed on contract by Hearst as a circulation manager of the Chicago American. For $20,000 a year, McCormick induced him to break the contract. The Annenberg brothers and their men began to prey upon the Hearst circulation workers as they had earlier preyed upon McCormick's. Hearst sued for a violation of his agreement. Hearst lost. Why? Because the courts held, as Annenberg's lawyers urged, that Hearst's contract with Annenberg was invalid because it was an agreement to commit unlawful acts. Later, Moe parted with his brother and Bertie McCormick. The bloody newspaper circulation war broke out anew in Chicago. Annenberg men were overpowering the Hearst thugs under O'Banion. Hearst bought insurance. He hired Moe Annenberg as circulation manager of all Hearst papers on the theory that his brother would soften his methods. Hearst was right. The brothers kept the peace, relatively speaking, but the evil they had done lived after their reform. By the time O'Banion was shot dead in 1925, the Chicago gang wars were shocking the world. So you see, truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. There never was a Satan-worshipping murder cult in the woods outside of Chicago. But somewhere deep inside the urban jungle that is the Windy City, there was a terror cult. But it wasn't motivated by a cryptic crystal ball reader hiding underneath a black robe. In a sort of cosmic irony, the paper that printed the rumors was indeed the greatest villain after all. Thank you guys for listening today. That's the end of this episode. I appreciate all of you so much. Before I get too far, I do want to let you know that, as always, this episode was brought to you in part by Earbuds Podcast Collective and the Indie Drop-In Network. Those are two incredible services if you are the kind of person that likes to find new podcasts. I am that kind of person, and those two services, I can personally attest, are a couple of the best in the business. Also, the people that run them are some of the best in the business, so really, check those out if you have any inkling of finding a new podcast. In fact, actually, before I get too far. I know I already said that, but I actually spoke with Ariel over at Earbuds Podcast Collective, and she gave me a wonderful idea. So maybe keep your schedules open for Thursdays, because I might, don't get your hopes up too high, because I am applying to grad school. I just applied to grad school. So don't get your hopes up too high, but I might be putting out something special on Thursdays here in the near future. So keep your eyes and your ears open for that. I'll give you more updates as I sort of get more updates myself. And for those updates, you can follow me on the socials at AllThePeoplePod on Twitter, because it doesn't let you change your username. At Obscure History Podcast on Instagram, because Instagram does let you change your username. Or if you want to write in, go ahead and do so directly at obscurehistorypod@gmail.com. Apparently, I'm living in 6 months in the past. In fact, actually, here's somebody that did write in to obscurehistorypod@gmail.com. So this is a really cool email that I got. They say, "Hi Josh, just wanted to drop a line that I'm really enjoying your podcast. I actually heard about it while listening to the Wild West Extravaganza podcast. They name-dropped obscure history, and I ended up adding it to my faves. Was listening to the episode on the Noid. I remember the commercials as well, and heard the call for music at the end. Although our band's sound is nothing like the song Feel My Flow by Virgo Gabriel that you played that day, I still wanted to introduce ourselves in the hope that you might play something by your European fans. As the subject line states, we're a rock band called The Mileage from Copenhagen, Denmark, and we've just released a new album about a month ago called More Mileage. Have a listen and see if there's anything you think you can use on the show. We'd be honored to be showcased on Obscure History. We're actually in the middle of shooting a music video for the song Dreary Days in the Job Jungle right now. Below is the playlist on SoundCloud, but you can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. I truly wish you all the best in your podcasting endeavors and really appreciate all the hard work you do in putting it together. Lord knows it isn't easy. Keep up the good vibes." This is like the coolest email ever. And here we go. I'm going to use The Mileage as the outro music today. If you want to get your music featured, or if you want me to read some sort of email shout out, all you got to do is write in, guys. This is a DIY organization here. So like anything you send me, I will definitely read. So without any further ado, here is The Mileage from Denmark with their song The New Faith. I really enjoy this track. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Soundgarden, sort of. And also something to listen for if you're just wanting to actively listen to some music today. The ride cymbal on this track is airtight. It's got some like really cool triplet patterns, and I really appreciate Newton's drumming. So like definitely check these guys out. There's going to be a link in my show notes. Go listen to their stuff, watch their music videos. Anyways, I gotta go. It's almost midnight. I've got to go to work in the morning. So you guys have a nice week and enjoy this track.
Is wrong, that much is clear. make you morose if there is no higher plan for our lives. Life is its own very fine purpose, and isn't that enough to be alive?